at Thrive London. Thrive London is a participation-driven public mental health partnership that works to ensure all Londoners have an equal opportunity for good mental health and well-being. We are supported by the Mayor of London and the London Health Board partners. If you are someone supporting individuals who may be struggling right now, whether it be through volunteering, helping in your local community, or just as a friend or neighbour, then this webinar will guide you through the support and practical advice available. So before I introduce Sarah Murphy, Senior Health, Social Care and Welfare System Strategy Lead at Money and Pension Service, I will run through a few housekeeping items. So this webinar is supported by a British Sign Language interpreter, Samaya. So welcome, Samaya. We're asking people to please, if you could please keep your cameras and microphones turned off during the webinar. This webinar is not intended as a substitute for a mental health or psychological intervention. If you feel like you need more immediate or urgent mental health support, please do call the NHS Urgent Mental Helpline, and you can find the right helpline for you at nhs.uk. We'll put the link to that Urgent Mental Health Helpline in the chat. The Samaritans are here to listen at any time of day or night. You can talk to them about anything that's troubling you, no matter how difficult. So call for free on 116 123. You will find more information about getting further support at the end of this webinar, and there will be a Q&A session at the end. So please do put any questions you have in the chat. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for you along with the slides on the Thrive London website. So if I just run through today's agenda, we've got a welcome and introduction. I'll then be handing over to Sarah to talk about money and mental health and practical tools and resources available. We'll then pass back to me to talk about helping you to help others, and then we'll move on to a Q&A session. If you have a question, then please do put your question in the chat for the Q&A later. My colleagues at Thrive London will be collecting the questions. So I'm really delighted to be joined by Sarah Murphy, Senior Health, Social Care and Welfare System Strategy Lead at Money and Pension Service for today's webinar. Sarah, I will now hand over to you to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha, and a very warm welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for giving up an hour of your day to talk about mental health and money and how you can, how we, hopefully at the Money and Pension Service, can help you to help others. And the fact that so many people have signed up and have joined today, I think just shows how important and very relevant this subject is for everybody at the moment. One thing I just want to check is that the slides have moved forward, because there's some strange things going on at my end. So if I could just get a thumbs up from Natasha that you can see the Talk Money Week slide. Yeah, great. So mental health and money. As this slide shows, 19 million people, according to some research we've done recently, are worried when they're thinking about their financial situation. Now, that's not surprising. We can't get away from the cost of living crisis. It's on the TV, it's in our newspapers, it's on the radio, it's on social media. And for many of us, in fact, all of us, I imagine, it's probably in our own bank accounts and our bank statements. We're probably seeing firsthand that our costs are going up, our fuel, our food, potentially our housing, but possibly our incomes aren't going up to match, and that's really causing people some difficulties. And what I always stress is that being worried about something doesn't mean that you have a mental health problem. And I know that many of you in the audience are from the health sector, so we'll be more than aware of that. And it's important not to medicalise normal human responses to adverse life events. And so if something is concerning and there's a very real prospect of something bad happening, then it's quite normal to be worried and have anxiety about that. That obviously becomes a problem if it continues and it's pervasive and it starts to impact on our lives. And often that can happen with mental health problems when someone doesn't get the support that they need. And I would say that there's lots of parallels with money problems as well, because that anxiety can continue and really start to cause a mental health problem if someone doesn't get support for their money problem. So for those of you who might not know about the Money and Pension Service, we're an organisation which is backed by the government. We do a number of things, including deliver some services which are free and impartial. We also conduct a lot of research, so some of the insights I'm going to talk about later on are from the research that we've conducted as an organisation. But in the main, we're set up to try to support and improve the financial well-being of everyone across the UK. Now you can see the definition that we have of financial well-being there. It's about feeling secure and in control, making the most of your money day to day, dealing with the unexpected, being on track for a healthy financial future, resilient, confident and empowered. Now, before I joined the Money and Pension Service, I worked for quite a long time for a mental health charity. And before that, I was a debt advisor. So my experience in the main is around helping people with both mental health and money problems. Now, for those of you in the audience who are from a health background, I'm wondering if there are any words in that definition that ring a bell for you in relation to mental health. Feel free to pop them in the chat if there are any that you recognise in relation to mental health. Because certainly from my experience of working in mental health and working with people who are struggling with their mental health, they often would tell me that they didn't feel in control of their own lives or situation, sometimes feeling that things were being done to them. Someone's just said resilient. Absolutely, that comes up a lot, doesn't it, in relation to mental health? And again, from my experience, resilience isn't just a one-size-fits-all thing. It comes in different shapes for different people, and it can be shaped by our experiences and our knowledge and the support that we have to deal with events. And I think that's exactly the same with finances as well. We need support, we need to understand what our options are, we need experiences sometimes to be able to have that resilience to unexpected shocks. Confidence, absolutely, that's another word that comes up a lot in relation to mental health. Secure, empowered, brilliant, yes. So for me, as I said, working in both of these fields, both mental health and money, there are lots of parallels for me around mental health and well-being and financial health and well-being. So that's in the main what we're going to cover and talk a bit about today. So our latest research shows that about 66% of people who say that they are living with a mental health problem, and that's self-diagnosed, not necessarily just a clinical diagnosis, they say that they're feeling anxious about how much they owe on credit. And every year, the Money and Pension Service run this week, Talk Money Week, to try to encourage people to talk about money. And again, let's think about the parallels there with mental health. When I first started working in the mental health sector, people didn't talk about it. There was huge amount of stigma and shame to talk about mental health. I would say it's probably not perfect now, but we've definitely made some huge strides with campaigns like anti-stigma campaigns like Time to Change. But there still seems to be a bit of a stigma around talking about money. So we really want to encourage people to talk about money. And today, that's one of the things I want to do to talk to you about today. So we're going to cover off some of the links between mental health and money, both in terms of what the data is telling us about the scale of the problem, but also a bit about why these two things seem to be so inextricably linked. And then the important part, what can we all do about it? And I'm going to share some tools and resources that I hope will be able to help you to help others and potentially help yourself as well, because this isn't something that's just happening to people over there. We all have mental health. We all have to deal with money, and sometimes our mental health may not be so good, and sometimes our money situation may not be so good. So this is something that's universal. It's not just happening to people over there. So first of all, some statistics. So as I mentioned, at the Money and Pension Service, we conduct a whole load of different bits of research and insight gathering. And in 2021, we conducted something called an Adult Financial Wellbeing Survey. So this is a huge survey. It went out to over 10,000 people across the UK. And we asked a range of questions, both about that person's own particular circumstances, personal circumstances, and also a range of questions about how they feel and how they can manage money. One of the questions that we asked was around whether people were struggling to keep up with bills or payments. Now, the UK average, in terms of the answer to that question, was that 50% of people said that they were struggling to keep up with bills and payments. 50%, half, which is mind-blowing in itself. The figure for just London, so the London average was 60%, so 10% more people were struggling with to keep up with bills and payments. But we also asked people whether they had experienced a mental health problem within the last 3 years. And if we look at that group, the figure jumps up yet again. So for the group of people who have experienced a mental health problem, 74% of them were struggling with bills and payments. And again, the London specific data is high once again. 76% of people who experience a mental health problem are also struggling to keep up with bills and payments. So that's showing us that there's a link one way or another there. Is it that someone is struggling with bills and payments and that means they're struggling with their mental health, or is it the other way around? The data doesn't tell us cause and effect, but what it shows us is that it's a huge chunk of people that are affected by both of these issues. We also know that half of people who are in problem debt also have a mental health problem. Now, by problem debt, we mean that someone's actually fallen behind with a bill or payment. So they're not just struggling with it, they've actually fallen behind, they're in arrears. It might be that they've fallen behind on their rent, so that there's a risk to losing their home, or their mortgage is the same risk. If they've fallen behind with their council tax, some councils use bailiffs to try to get the money back, which is pretty frightening. Or credit cards or loans. And generally with those kinds of debts, the creditors are calling, they're texting, they're demanding the payments back. So it's not surprising when you think about that pressure that if that 50% of people who are in problem debt also experience a mental health problem. Now the next figure comes from a survey that we've done just recently on the run-up to Talk Money Week. And we asked people whether or not they avoided talking about money. And this was across the UK. Bit of a smaller sample than our full adult financial wellbeing survey. Now the UK average for this was 81%. So 81% of UK adults have told us they avoid talking about money. But when again we look at that data for the people who've also said that they experience a mental health problem, it shoots up to 91%. So the picture that we're starting to paint here is that struggling with bills and payments, falling behind and into debt, and mental health problems are really closely linked, and it's actually affecting quite a big chunk of the population, both here in London and across the UK. But worryingly, people aren't talking about it. They're not talking about money. And again, from a mental health perspective, we know that not talking about how we're feeling, not talking about our concerns, can often lead to quite serious quite serious mental health issues. And it's the same, it's those parallels again, talking about money is important because there is help out there. But the earlier that you can get that help, the better. Because if we move on to the last statistic there, although it's the smallest figure, it's probably the scariest, isn't it? So we know that 13% of people who are in problem debt have thought about suicide. And although it's the smallest number, any number when we're talking about suicide is you know, a scary number and is too high. And again, it's not surprising if people get to that point where they feel so hopeless and that there's no way out and that the money problem is just so overwhelming, then they've reached that point where they are contemplating suicide. So although that's a stark picture in terms of the stats, what it doesn't go into in a lot of detail is perhaps, well, why are these two things so closely linked? So again, from my experience, and there's many of you on the call and may have your own experiences, so do share if it's appropriate to do so in the chat. I've worked with people who've come to me, and by the time they've come to me, both their mental health and their money problem is in a real crisis situation. And when I've worked with that person and I've explored what's gone on, they kind of enter this vicious cycle of mental health and money problems from both sides. I've worked with people who've experienced it from both sides. If we take entering it from the money problem first, oftentimes someone is ticking along in life absolutely fine, and then something will happen which comes out of the blue, that unexpectedness that we talked about earlier, which knocks them off course financially. So it might be a relationship breakdown or a bereavement. And in both of those situations, whereas they might have had two incomes coming into the household and that was covering the bills quite nicely, if that goes down to one income coming into the household, your outgoings don't half. You've still got you know, full rent to pay or full mortgage to pay, for example. So that really puts a squeeze on people's money situation and can start to trigger a money problem. Losing your job, redundancy, perhaps having to take time off because of ill health, fluctuating income, particularly for people who are self-employed. All of these things can cause a money problem. And at the moment, with cost of living, what we're seeing isn't so much an income issue, a loss of income. What we're seeing is increased costs. And that's meaning that people have got really difficult decisions that they're having to make about what they spend their money on. And as I mentioned earlier, having a money problem is stressful. You don't know what's going to happen next. You're constantly having to question, you know, what will I do with the money that I have? How do I spread it around and pay everybody when I don't have enough money to pay everybody? Does it mean that I don't eat? Does it mean that I don't put the heating on? And that is a very stressful way to live. And again, for those of you on the call who might have done some mental health awareness training or indeed are mental health professionals, you've probably heard of the stress bucket. If not, very quickly, the stress bucket is an idea that we all have our own stress buckets, and they're sort of different shapes and sizes. And all of us in life have stresses that rain down into our stress bucket. It might be relationship stress, work stress, financial stress. And if that stress is raining into our buckets and the bucket is getting increasingly full, if it gets to that point where the bucket overflows, then that's when we can start to tip into potentially having a mental health problem. Usually with the stress bucket, when we're talking about mental health, we talk about needing to have holes or taps in the bottom of the bucket to release the stress. And sometimes that includes doing activities that are good for our well-being. And if all of those stresses are money stresses, then my suggestion is the tap is some sort of support and guidance or advice for the money problem. So it's not difficult to see why money problems have that increased stress and then can tip round into someone having a mental health problem. But equally, on the other side, I've worked with people where they are perhaps living with a mental health condition or a diagnosed mental illness. And obviously, conditions affect people in different ways, symptoms affect people in different ways. So I'm not suggesting that there's a one size fits all here. It's very personal. But just as some examples, I've worked with people who are experiencing anxiety, different symptoms of anxiety. And for some people that can make making decisions very difficult because they are questioning all the time whether they're making the right decision, and it almost paralyzes them so that they can't make a decision. And sometimes that means they can't make a decision about a money issue, in which case a money problem happens and there they are in that cycle. Similarly with depression, if someone's experiencing low mood, it can be very difficult for them to have motivation to make a decision or to deal with financial problems or issues. I've also worked with people where they've bought gifts when they've had that very low mood, often for other people, because that's made them feel better. But perhaps they've not been able to afford those gifts and it's caused a money problem. For some people with conditions such as bipolar disorder or emotionally unstable personality disorder, that can often mean that there's a lack of impulse control. Again, not in everybody, but in some clients that I've worked with. And again, some examples of people that I've helped where they've bought clothing, sometimes it's clothing that they've not been able to afford when they were perhaps in a manic phase. Somebody that I worked with had bought a sports car. Someone I'd worked with had actually given all of their money away during a manic phase, all of the cash that they had in their bank. And when they came out of that phase and into a depressive phase, the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment of what they had done was really possibly worse for them, is what they told me, than when they were in that manic phase. And again, it means that they've got a money problem, they've got this debt or they don't have any money, which has caused an issue, and they've also perhaps got those feelings where they just can't deal with it. And for other conditions like schizophrenia, that can make sometimes actually the side effects of medication are worse for people than the condition. But in terms of money, that can sometimes make making decisions about money more difficult. Again, I've worked with people where that what we might think is like a linear thought process, and being able to say, oh, well, if my money comes in on a Monday, if I spend it all on a Tuesday, I'm not going to have any left Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sometimes that sort of thought process didn't quite work, and people were often left without money for days when I was working with some clients in that position. So it's not hard to see when we think about it that way how people can get into this mental health problem and money problem cycle. And just with mental health problems, people often need support. Same with money problems. And from my experience, people really need a bit of a pincer approach. So if they are struggling with both their mental health and a money problem, they need support from both angles. So both support for their mental health and for their money. And that will often give the best outcome. So what can we do about it? So just like again, I'm going to bring lots of parallels with mental health here. So many of you on the call may have done some mental health awareness training, or perhaps mental health first aid or suicide first aid. And in the main, what that training will have done is probably given you some confidence, given you some knowledge and skills, and made you feel a bit more confident to be able to actually have a conversation with someone that you're working with, or even someone that you know, a friend or a family member, who you suspect might be struggling. Well, similarly with money, what we have developed here at the Money and Pension Service alongside the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities is a short e-learning course about financial well-being. It just launched on Tuesday, so this is hot off the press, and it's part of the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities All Our Health e-learning series. So there's a whole range of topics within the All Our Health series, and financial well-being has just been added from Tuesday. All our health modules follow a similar sort of pattern. So there's a section which explains why this topic is important. So it talks about the links between health and money. And for this module, it actually talks about health in the broadest sense, not just mental health, because there's lots of evidence about the impact of money problems on physical health too. There's then a section which talks about what you can do practically to support. And although this is aimed at health and care professionals, I know that not everyone on this call is a health and care professional, but it's a short e-learning course. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to do. And although some of the language you might think, oh, that doesn't apply to me because it's talking about health and care professionals, it's still got some really useful hints and tips in there that I think are useful to take away. What we're absolutely not suggesting is that a health and care professional or any of you on this call who isn't trained as a money advisor or a debt advisor should suddenly start giving somebody some money advice if you think that they're struggling with both their mental health and their money. That is absolutely not what we're suggesting that anybody does. To be able to give advice on a money issue, particularly debts, you need to be trained, supervised, you need to have insurance, because if someone sues you, if you give wrong advice, then you can be sued. If it's debt advice, you also need to be regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. So my message today is absolutely do not give any advice on a money issue, but really encouraging you to see that there are links between the two, and that someone that is in front of you might be struggling with a money problem as well as their mental health. And what we're advocating in the training is something that you might have heard of before, which is a very brief intervention, where we're suggesting that you can ask whether there's a money problem, offer to assist, and then act. And I can see that someone put in the chat there, signposting. Absolutely. It's about signposting or making a direct referral into a service that can help that person with their money issue. Now, that might feel a bit daunting, but again, just like with mental health training, there are phrases that we are encouraged to say. So for example, asking someone, how are you? And then asking again, how are you really? Something that is often trained in a mental health awareness course. So here are just some suggested conversation starters in terms of using that ask, assist and act model. So, is it okay if I ask you about money and finances? Or, there's lots of pressure out there about money at the moment, which can be really stressful. Is it okay if I ask you about money? Well, I've got some useful information I can share with you on money and finances if you'd like to hear more. So not necessarily pushing it on the person, but giving that space, that opportunity for them to perhaps open up about a money issue. And would you like me to refer you, or would you like me to signpost you to a source of support for your money issue? So I'm sure there are lots of other ideas, and if anyone's had any experience of broaching the money topic, again, please do share in the chat. Those are just some ideas of conversation starters to be able to ask, assist, and then act in relation to a money problem. If someone says, yes, I do want some help from a money situation, well, where do you send them? If that person hasn't fallen behind and isn't in debt, and I'm going to come to if they're in debt in a moment, but if they've got questions about money, if they are struggling with their energy bills, for example, or they don't know what benefits they might be entitled to, or they've been asked to pay for adult social care costs, there maybe is an issue with a will or inheritance, absolutely any question that you can think of about money, I'm pretty much sure that the answer can be on our Money Helper service. So Money Helper is a service that we at the Money and Pension Service provide. So I mentioned earlier that we are backed by government, so the service is free, it's impartial, and it's constantly kept up to date, so it's a trusted source of support. So I'm aware that many of you might already have links with local advice services, and that's absolutely fantastic. This is not to replace that, but it's certainly an alternative if it's a more general money question and perhaps not a debt question. And there's everything on there from pocket money right through to pensions. So a huge array of information. It's available on the website, and people can also contact our Money Guiders team via the website, via web chat. It's also available via a free phone telephone number, and people can contact via WhatsApp as well. If someone that you're working with has their first language isn't English, the team on the helpline can also access interpreters through Language Line. So we hope that it's as accessible as it can be. There are lots of tools on the website as well, or that can be talked through over the telephone with our helpline guiders. And I'm going to talk through some of those tools in a moment. And also on the website, probably one of the things it doesn't do, because it provides money guidance, is it doesn't provide debt advice. But on the website is this debt advice locator tool, and the person can pop in their postcode, or you can put in their postcode for them, and that will bring up all of the debt advice services that could be available to them, which are free and independent. So it might be a local service that you're already familiar with, or if that person feels comfortable and is able to access debt advice over the telephone or online, then it brings up all of the different options for receiving debt advice. And we're very conscious of the cost of living pressures that people are facing at the moment. So there's a whole raft of content online, and again available through our helpline as well, on this very topic. So there's a whole section on helping squeezed incomes go further. So I mentioned earlier that our costs are going up, but perhaps our income isn't, so our incomes are being squeezed. So there's masses of information about different support that people might be entitled to, how to track spending. Our budget planner is very popular. Also, if someone is facing job loss or redundancy that you're working with, or that you know, there's a whole section of information for people there, so they know their rights and how to protect their finances. And for people who are self-employed, it's always difficult because your income might fluctuate. And so there's a whole section of information on there that's dedicated to people who are self-employed and might also be struggling at the moment. And one of the tools that we've created is a bill prioritizer tool. So I mentioned earlier, I used to be a debt advisor, and one of the first things that I learned was that there are two types of payment in the main: a priority and a non-priority. And a priority payment is one where if you don't pay it, you can lose something that's important to you. And a non-priority is one where if you don't pay it, the consequences aren't as severe. But in the main, people don't know the difference between those two. And they also don't know that depending on the kind of bill or payment that they're worried about, there might be different options available to them for getting help. There might be different techniques that they use to contact and deal with those creditors. So we've created this bill prioritizer tool where people can select which bills that they're worried about. And what the system will do is take each bill in turn and walk through the different options for dealing with it, for getting help, you know, with paying. So for energy, for example, there's different sources of support for paying energy bills, but also how you might approach talking to that creditor if you're concerned that you can't afford, or you might fall behind on that bill. And last but not least, what I wanted to share with you is something that we've worked alongside a mental health charity to create, called a mental health and money toolkit. So this was developed by a service called Mental Health and Money Advice, which is actually the mental health charity that I used to work for. And the Money and Pension Service have supported the development of it alongside the National Academy for Social Prescribing. And when the toolkit was developed, or going through that development phase, the charity worked with people who had experience of mental health and money problems, and they asked, what is it that you would find useful and how would you want to get that information? And what they told us was that they would like a patient-held record, so something that they could take with them, and had space for writing notes and jotting thoughts down. And they also wanted that pincer approach that I talked about earlier. So they wanted something that would help with how they were feeling about money. And they also wanted some money guidance in terms of what to do with the money issue as well. So the toolkit takes that pincer approach, and the first few sections are looking at mental health and well-being. So there are some cognitive behavioural therapy technique exercises in there for dealing with avoidance and problem solving and building self-esteem, because that was actually the overwhelming feedback from the group of people who had that lived experience, was that they felt really embarrassed, ashamed, guilty for struggling, and that those feelings were, you know, preventing them from then being able to get any support. So the first section is trying to address that and really reassuring people that they're not alone, that, you know, there are so many people who are in this situation and that help is available. The second sort of part of the booklet then covers some money guidance. So it explains a priority and a non-priority payment. There is a space in there for people to make notes and jot down an income and expenditure sheet so they can see what they've got coming in and going out. There's a whole section on preparing for a welfare benefits appointment or application, because again, that was something that people told us that they felt very anxious about. And there's also a section on there for how to prepare for and what to expect from a debt advice appointment as well. So these toolkits are available online. There's the link there on the slide. What's on the website is an editable PDF. And there are also versions that can be printed in black and white, so they don't have the colours, so they don't take up as much printer ink. But if you, as an organisation, you would like a number of these to be able to give out to the people that you might be working with, please do send an email to partners@maps.org.uk, because we have got some printed versions. Actually, I don't know whether you can see it, because they come in these nice little A5 booklets. So we can send a bunch of those out to you, to your workplace, and you can give them out to your stakeholders, whoever that they might be. And before I hand back to Natasha, what I just wanted to finish with, as with, again, with the parallels with mental health and well-being, I think usually a mental health awareness session, for example, would end with a section on don't forget to look after your own mental health and well-being. And a phrase that I really like is, you know, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah, it's true.
So just similarly with financial well-being, please, you know, look after your own financial well-being. Everything that I've talked about today, the support that's out there, the website, the helpline, the toolkit, all of it is just as useful for you, for me, for the people that are in your friends and family circle, as they are for the people that you might be working with. So please do talk about money. Let's try and reduce the stigma and the shame that still surrounds it. It's not embarrassing. We all have to deal with money, and we all might end up, you know, with money difficulties at some point. So let's talk about it. Let's get help, and let's really tackle in a pincer movement this stigma around both mental health and money issues.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand back over to Natasha, and I'll also be around for questions in a moment.
Thank you so much, Sarah. There's a wealth of information there, and
really good.
lots of. Sorry, could I just ask to put yourselves on mute, please, if that's okay, and keep your cameras turned off as well. Thank you. Yes, Sarah, we've had lots of messages coming through in the chat, with people also sharing resources as well. So we will be collating all of that information and making sure that we get that across to you. That will be sharing the recording and the slides. But yes, we really hope you find the information and support that Sarah has presented as useful. We know that conversations about mental health are not always easy, and sometimes conversations may touch on sensitive and emotional topics, and it can be difficult to know the best way to approach the conversation. So at Thrive London, we've developed a conversation starter tool called Signs, and this is to help you feel confident to engage in conversations with friends, family, neighbours, or those you support in your community or in the workplace about mental health and well-being. So I've put this up on the screen, which I hope you can see now. And in addition to the tools and resources that Sarah has been talking about, Signs, sorry, just bear with me 2 seconds. Can you see that now? Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry about that, slight technical error. So Signs is made up of 5 different parts and is really a guide for encouraging a gentle conversation, and we will send you a link to the conversation tool. So to start with, situation. So try using a situation to find common ground, be that a recent, current or future event that means something to you both. Initiate. So initiating a caring conversation is an act of kindness. It's good for your own well-being as well as for someone else. And a direct question asked gently gets to the point and is an honest way to begin. We then move on to guide. So being a good listener shows someone that you are genuinely interested in how they are doing. We suggest using open-ended questions to guide them into talking more without judgment or negative reactions to what they have to say. A nudge in the right direction can help people to search for their own resolution. So positive encouragement and practical suggestions can also be a helpful prompt. And then support and signpost. We know it can be hard to know where to turn and what help is available. So this is an opportunity to point someone in the right direction for support. And if you're struggling with how to start the conversation, we've suggested some prompts and questions, such as, I know lots of people are finding things difficult at the moment and wondering when things will get easier. How are you doing? And those prompts and questions work through all the different parts of Signs. Moving down to the next page and around support and signpost and where can I find help? It's also helpful to know what support and advice services are available, which can offer professional help if needed. So as part of the conversation starter toolkit, there are 2 pages with a comprehensive list of organisations offering support and advice, one specifically for mental health support and one for financial advice and practical help. You just come off my page. Sorry, just bear with me. So we know that now more than ever, it is important to make having supportive conversations a little easier and practical ways to signpost those who may need support towards services and resources relevant to them. And we really hope you find this resource helpful. But please remember that you're not alone and there are people and organisations that can support you. So we hope you found today's webinar helpful, and we would also welcome any feedback on what you've heard today. So please do contact us at info@thrivelondon.co.uk, and one of my colleagues will put our email address in the chat. We will be sharing the recording and the slides with you all. We're now going to stop recording and we're going to move into a Q&A session. So I know there's been quite a few questions come through in the chat, which my Thrive London colleagues have been collecting, and we will now see if we can read some of these out loud.
Thanks, Natasha. I know quite a few of you have been sort of posting in the chat about the toolkit. So you'll see that Sarah's posted a link in there for you to follow if you'd like to access the toolkit online. And then I've also posted the email address that Sarah shared, which will also be in the slides, which you'll receive after the session if you'd like to receive any hard copies. We have had a question, Sarah, about whether there's any cost for these hard copies.
No, they're absolutely free.
Perfect, thank you. We've also had another question, which I'll put to both of you. If someone is stressed or experiencing poor mental health as a result of money problems, is it better to signpost them to mental health support or financial support first?
I think I would say both at the same time if possible. I guess it depends on how pressing, if there's a particular issue that is more pressing. If, for example, someone is at risk of losing their home, if there are bailiffs, coming, if there's real threats in relation to debt collection, then that is incredibly stressful. So I would say to signpost that person, refer that person to debt advice immediately, because in the short